Hello, everyone. Welcome to another science lesson. We are going to do a revision of last week's science lesson because, as you guys are all aware, we are all finished with the book. So now we're just taking our time into reviewing everything step by step, and we're just going to go over everything to help you do good on your progression exams, all right? So let's get into it. As you guys can all tell, we are talking about chapter 1 today. We're going to get into seeds, how they grow, where they come from, and you guys, this shouldn't be new to you guys. And if you do have any questions, please do leave comments below the video, okay? So, our first question is, what is a seed? Okay, well, a seed is the unit of production of a flowering plant capable of developing into another, such as a plant. Okay, so as you can see in the picture, those little pieces, those little brown circles are seeds. Okay, and those little things can eventually grow into a plant. All right, but this is only if they are given the right conditions. All right, so we're going to get into that as well. So, where can we find these seeds? That is the question. So, have you ever swallowed a seed when you were eating an apple or an orange? Well, we find seeds inside fruits. Fruits and seeds can be different sizes and shapes, okay? So, as you can tell in the picture, guys. So, cherries have, so pretty much every fruit has seeds, consists of seeds. And all the seeds do the same thing, but they are different. They come in different sizes, okay? So I don't know if you guys have ever seen an avocado seed. An avocado seed is very big. It's shaped like a little ball. All right? Or we have apple seeds, which are very, very small. Okay? Or the seeds you find in grapes, they are also very small. Or we have bean seeds that are found inside of a pod, right? So, as you guys all know, we find seeds inside of fruits and they come in different sizes and shapes, all right? They don't all look the same. So, do seeds have the same, like this? I literally answered this question. So, do seeds have the same shape and sizes? No, seeds can be different sizes and shapes, as you can see in the picture over here. So, avocados, grapes, apples, apricots, they all consist of seeds and they're all in different shapes and sizes. All right, I hope that is clear. Okay, now the question is, okay, so are seeds alive? Seeds are alive even though they look dead. So obviously, if you open up an apple and you see the seed, it doesn't look like it's alive because it doesn't move, right? But that just because it looks dead doesn't mean it is dead, all right? They are not. They are eventually going to grow into different plants. Okay? So the question is, what is inside of a seed? Okay, so like I mentioned to you guys before, a seed has about it has four different parts. Okay? So as you can see here, it has the outside of a seed is called a seed coat. Okay? And the seed coat is there. Its purpose is to protect the seed. Okay? Then we have the inside of a seed. All right? And the inside of the seed is called a food store. Okay? A food store is where all the food goes because obviously, in order for a seed to grow, it needs to be given food. And by food, I don't mean cheeseburgers. Okay? By food, I mean it needs to be given water, it needs to be given warmth. All right? It needs to be given the right things in order for it to grow. Okay? And the food store is where it carries all of that. After that, we also have it comes up here usually. It's called the embryo. Okay? The embryo is found inside of a seed, and that is kind of like the heart of the seed. It grows. The embryo is what grows into a plant. Okay? And yeah, and we have a scar. A scar is kind of like it's a little speck on the seed. It's the mark that was used to connect the seed to the fruit, all right? It doesn't really have a purpose. Its purpose is that it helps stick the seed onto the fruit, okay? That's why it's called a scar. So I hope that is clear. So just remember that we have four parts of a seed. We have a food store, we have a seed coat, we have a scar, and we have an embryo, okay? And they all have their own purposes. And remember that the tiny plant that is found inside of the seed is called an embryo. Okay. So, let's do another review. So, what are the parts of a seed? So, like I mentioned, the embryo is the inside of a seed, and it's the plant inside of a seed. So, do you see right here this little green plant inside the seed? That is called the embryo. It's kind of like the heart of the seed. Without an embryo, the seed would not grow into a plant. Then we have, do you see this brown outline on the seed? That is called a seed coat, okay? A seed coat is, usually seeds are covered by something called a seed coat, and it is used to protect the seed from any physical damage. It's kind of like its skin or its armor, if that makes sense. We also have the food store. The food store is kind of like the stomach of the seed, okay? And like I mentioned before, in the food store, the seeds get their energy from the food store because that is where they carry all the food. And by food, I mean water, warmth, all that kind of stuff. And then we have the scar. The scar is usually, the seeds have scars, and the scar is what helped join the seed to the fruit. Okay? It's what helped connect it. So I hope that is clear. You guys really need to know this. Okay, so this is a huge question. So, what is germination? Okay, so germination comes in about 6 steps. And the general meaning of germination is basically when a seed starts to grow. Okay, so I've noticed a lot of you making mistakes anytime I ask this question. You cannot say germination is when a plant starts to grow. Okay, because that is incorrect. I mean, the plant is like, there is a difference between a seed and a plant. The point of germination is for us to study how the seed eventually grows into the plant. All right? If you say when a plant grows, the plant is already grown. Okay, so it doesn't really make sense, right? So it is very important for you to not make that mistake and remember that germination is when a seed starts to grow. Okay, so it is the process by which an organism grows from a seed, that organism being the embryo. Okay? Yeah, so before I get into that other slide, so yeah, if a seed is given the right conditions, like I mentioned, and the embryo is alive, it will grow. When a seed starts to grow, we say it germinates. This process is called germination. The seed uses its food store to give it the energy to grow. The seed shrivels and becomes small after germination. So let's talk about the different steps of germination. Okay, so this should be familiar to you guys, okay? So the first things first, the seed will absorb the water and swell. Okay, so it'll take in the water and it'll swell up. And it'll swell up all the way until number 2 happens. The seed coat will split. Okay? And when the seed coat splits, the first root begins to grow. Okay? And remember, when roots grow, they always start growing down, not up. Next step, the root starts to grow down into the soil. Okay, so remember, so far, step number 1, the seed absorbs water and swells. Step number 2, the seed coat splits and the first root starts to grow. Step number 3, the root grows down into the soil. Alright, remember, the root always grows down first. Step number 4, what happens? The first shoot starts to grow. So the shoot is the part of the plant, the seed that grows up. Okay? Number 5, the shoot grows up above the ground. Do you see that? It grows up above the ground, and then you see side roots beginning to grow. And then finally, in step number 6, the first leaves start to grow, and so do, like the side roots have grown out fully. Okay? So that is very important for you guys to know. Okay, so now, when do seeds start to germinate? Okay, so obviously seeds start to germinate when the conditions are right and the embryo is alive. Okay, so what do we mean by the right conditions? By right conditions, we mean that the seed needs 3 main things, and you need to always remember this. The seed needs water, warmth, and air. Okay? Water, warmth, and air. Water, warmth, and air. Remember that. Like, just try to, stick that into your head. They need these 3 things in order to grow, obviously, along with the embryo being alive. If the embryo is dead, the seed won't grow at all, because that's kind of like the heart of the seed. Okay? So remember, the seed needs, they need to germinate if the conditions are right. What we mean by when the conditions are right, we mean it needs water, warmth, and air, and we need the embryo to be alive. Okay? Like I mentioned. So which 3 conditions are needed for seeds to start growing? Seeds need water, seeds need warmth, and seeds need air. Okay, sometimes people get light confused. No, seeds do not need light to germinate. Remember that. They do not need light to germinate. Plants need light as food, but not seeds. They don't need light to germinate. Seeds need water, warmth, and air to germinate. Okay? So let's get into plants now. So, what do plants need to grow? Okay, so plants and seeds are very similar, obviously, because they're one. So, we mentioned how seeds need water, air, and warmth to grow. Okay? Well, plants need factors from the environment to make them grow as well. They need light energy, air, water, and warmth. So, that is just one more thing they need from seeds. So we said seeds need air, water, and warmth. Plants need light energy, air, water, and warmth. So basically the same things, but you add light energy to it. Okay? Plants need factors from the environment to help them grow. And the factors plants need are, like I mentioned, light energy, air, water, and warmth. Okay, so plants need water so they can have strong stems and firm leaves. They also use water to transport substances such as food to all parts of the plant. It's kind of like swallowing food. Like if we eat a lot of food but we don't drink water afterwards, it's going to be hard for the food to travel. It's important that also plants have their liquids as well. Most plants grow best when they get warmth. Most grow better if it's not too hot or not too cold. Plants make their own food, and they need light energy for this. That is why it is important for plants to have light energy, because it helps them make their own food. A plant that does not get light energy grows long, thin stems, and becomes weak and dies. Okay? So that is why it's important to put your plants in front of the light. Plants are living things, and living things need air, just like us. Okay, just like us, they need oxygen. and plants without air will eventually die. Light energy is a factor that helps plants grow. Plants need the energy in sunlight to make food in their leaves. Plants always grow towards the source of light energy. Okay, so you need to remember this, guys. I hope that was clear. Okay, guys. Now, let's get into, so you need to know that plants need light energy to grow well, and plants need light energy to make food in their leaves. We did mention that. And now let's get into the life cycle of flowering a plant. So as you all can see, plants always start off as seeds, okay? And the seeds grow into young plants, and then they eventually mature into full, like, they turn into mature plants, okay? They're fully grown. And then they will develop flowers, and these flowers always carry fruits. And it just becomes a cycle, and it continues to happen over and over and over again, okay? So once the fruits, seeds are spread out, the same thing will happen again. A cycle, the point of a cycle is that it repeats itself, okay? So that is the life cycle of flowering a plant. We need to know that most plants have flowers, but not all do. And flowers can be big or small, colorful or non-colored, scented or unscented. Flowers help plants to reproduce. So you need to know, what is the job of a flower? The job of a flower is to help plants reproduce. You need to know this. Yes, so plants can come in different sizes, big or small. They're colorful, they're not very colorful, they're scented, they're not scented. And flowers make fruits. And flowers also help reproduce, okay? That is the job of a flower. So, yeah, before I get into seed dispersal, I want you guys to know that when a plant produces flowers, the flowers usually last only a few days. Then they wither and fall off the plant. However, part of the flower stays behind on the plant. This part becomes the fruit. The seed forms inside the fruit, and the seed grows into new plants. The new plants grow and produce flowers to form new fruits and seeds. So flowers help the plant reproduce to form new plants. Okay, so what is seed dispersal? I think most of you remember that seed dispersal is how seeds are spread. Okay? So, what is meant by seed dispersal? Seed dispersal is when seeds are spread or scattered away from the plant where they are formed. Okay? So do you see how this plant carries all these seeds? These seeds will eventually travel everywhere in different ways. So those different ways being, it could travel by wind. Animals can take it. They can eat them and then poop them out and leave them somewhere. What else? We said wind. We said animals, water, all right? All that kind of stuff. So, like I mentioned just now as well, let's talk about that. So, seed dispersal is when we spread seeds away from the plant where they were formed. There are different types of seed dispersals. The first type of seed dispersal we are going to talk about is water. Okay? So water, why is this the type of seed dispersal? It is because it is able to be dispersed by water because the plant needs a husk. They are hollow inside and they split open when it reaches the shore. This is usually seeds that are spread through water are coconuts. Coconuts are a really good example. Another way seeds can be dispersed is through explosive action or explosion. Okay? Seeds will explode when it's ripe and it can be dispersed by up to 15 meters. Okay, so usually bean pods. So when bean pods are out in the hot weather, when it gets too hot for it to handle, it will explode, and the beans inside the bean pods will spread everywhere. Another type of seed dispersal is wind. Okay, so seeds from plants like dandelions, swan plants, and cottonwood trees are light, and they have feathery bristles and can be carried long distances by the wind. Okay, so I don't know if you guys have ever blown a dandelion, which is this right here. If you blow a dandelion, you will just see dozens and dozens of little feathery bristles flying around, and they will travel long distances and eventually spread around to create more dandelions. Another type of seed dispersal is through animals. Okay, so animals disperse seeds in several ways. The fruit is digested by the animal, but the seeds pass through the digestive tract and are dropped in other locations. Okay, so when animals eat fruits or that have seeds in it, or anything that contains seeds, they will obviously, when you eat something, it digests, and then after a couple hours you need to let it out. Okay, so they can travel a very long way and eventually let it out, and that is how they spread it. Or some animals bury seeds, like how squirrels bury acorns to save it for later, but may not return to get the seed, so it can grow into a plant eventually. Or another way seed can be dispersed through animals is when they're walking in the forest, and seeds get caught in their fur, and eventually while they're walking the seeds kind of fall off their fur. That's how they can spread it as well. So yeah, this is a picture that shows you ways seeds can travel or be dispersed. Okay, so now let's talk about the parts of a flower. Okay, so as you all know, let me get into this. As you all are aware, flowers have these main parts. These parts of a flower are arranged in rings, one inside the other. Okay? So, as you all know, that we have petals, we have the stigma, we have the stamen, we have the sepals, the stem, the oval, the ovary, the pistil, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we can split these parts of a flower into two groups, female and male. Okay, so the female parts of the flower are the stigma, the ovary. All right, what else? The style, which is also a part of the stigma. And yeah. Whereas the male parts are the stamen, the anther, the filament. Okay? Those are very important to know. And the petal and stem, the sepals they aren't a part of any of the groups. So the flowers are two main parts, like I mentioned, which are male and female. The male parts of the flower are called the stamen, which is called the stamen, and are made up of the anther at the top and the stalk or the filament that supports the anther. The female elements are collectively called the pistil. The top of the pistil is called the stigma, which is the sticky surface receptive to pollen. Okay, so let's talk about the male part of a flower, which is the stamen. The stamen is the male part of a flower, which makes a powder called pollen in its tip, called the anther. The anther is obviously the tip of the stamen, okay? So as you can see, this is the stamen, and the tip of the stamen is called an anther. This part of the whole thing is called a stamen. The top of the stamen is called an anther. The bottom part is called a filament, and the filament supports the anther into making it accessible to insects. Okay, let's talk about the female part of a flower, which is the stigma, okay? And there's a couple more. So the stigma is its female part of a flower that receives the pollen at pollination during pollination. The ovary is the female part of a flower that contains the eggs. The carpel is the female part of a flower that contains tiny eggs inside the ovary. It is the tip. Its tip is called the stigma. Okay, so the ovary is what carries the eggs. The carpel is outside of the ovary. The stigma is the tip up here. The ovule is the place, it's not in the book, but it's just nice to have extra information. But the ovule is the place where the female reproductive cells are made and contained, and it is what eventually develops into a seed after fertilization. And the style is, this is the name for the stalk of the pistil. Okay? I know there's some extra information here that you haven't learned before. Don't worry about that. It's just, for fun. Otherwise, do what's required from the book. Other parts of the flower that are not female or male are petals, which are often brightly colored to attract insects to the flower. And we also have sepals, which are little green leaves that protect the flower bud. Now, pollination. Pollination is a very important process that you need to know. It is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male anther of a flower to the female stigma. So it is when pollen is taken from the stamen to the stigma. Okay? The goal of every living organism, including plants, is to create offspring for the next generation. What that means, let me translate it because obviously it might be hard to understand. But this means that the purpose of pollination is to make more flowers, okay? To make baby flowers. And to do that, you need to take pollen from the stamen to the stigma, okay? And yeah. And the way plants produce offspring, the way plants make more plants is by making seeds, and that is through pollination. Pollination by insects. So flowers pollinated by insects usually have brightly colored and scented petals, okay? And that's what makes the insects want to go and take the pollen. Some flowers also make nectar, a sweet liquid. Insects visit flowers to feed on the nectar. They are covered in pollen and carry the pollen to the stigma of the same flower or another flower. Okay, so what insects would do is that they would take the pollen from one flower, from one stamen, and they would take that to another stigma of another flower. So yeah. Okay, so pollination by wind. How does that happen? Well, flowers pollinated by the wind are not brightly colored and do not have petals or scent because wind-pollinated flowers make lots of pollen, and pollen is blown in the wind from the stamen to the stigma of other flowers. Fertilization. Okay, so once pollination happens, once the pollen is taken from the stamen to the stigma, the pollen goes down the stigma and then into the ovaries, and fertilization happens. What is fertilization? Fertilization in flowering plants happens through a process called pollination. Pollination occurs when the pollen grains from when pollen is taken from a stamen to the stigma, and then fertilization occurs when the pollen covers up the eggs and eventually forms seeds. Okay? I think you guys also have this in your notebooks. So yeah, and once the seeds are created, that is how the plant life cycle goes. Okay, so let's just generally talk about the plant life cycle at the moment. So the plants start off as seeds, then it germinates and grows into a plant. Then the adult plant reproduces flowers, which are pollinated and fertilized to produce seeds in a fruit or seed pod. And then the seeds are dispersed and germinated to produce new plants. Okay? So, you need to remember, So the plant life cycle always starts with seeds, okay? Seed germination. The seed germinates. And then this plant will eventually grow. Once the plant is grown, pollination and fertilization happens, which means that plants make more plants. Then seed production happens, okay? And then seed dispersal happens where the fruit releases the seeds and spread them around. And then eventually the plant dies and more seeds grow. Okay, so it is a cycle. It will happen over and over again. As you can see here in the picture, which is also in your books on pages 30 and 31. So yeah, that was our review on chapters 1 and 2. I hope you guys understood. If you have any questions regarding these two chapters, please do let me know. Thank you very much.